and welcome to Management Q's webinar series on the art of effective management. We're thrilled to have you join us today for what promises to be an enlightening and impactful journey into effective management practices. I'm Marisa Stoltzfus, your HROD executive expert, bringing you more than 25 years of experience, and I have the privilege of hosting this webinar series. Before we dive into the fascinating world of management, let's take a moment to understand why this series is so crucial. In today's ever-evolving business landscape, effective management is not just a skill, it's a strategic imperative. Whether you're leading a small team or an entire organization, the ability to manage resources, people, and processes is a cornerstone of success. The Art of Effective Management series is designed to share knowledge, tips and tools needed to navigate the complexities of management, enhance team performance, and drive organizational success. Throughout this series, we'll explore various functions of management, effective communication strategies, and key decision-making points that nurture a positive workplace culture. For today, we'll set the stage by discussing why effective management is a critical skill in our professional world. We'll explore those key components that contribute to effective management and how they impact organizational performance. And finally, we'll respond to a few of your questions. We value your insights and questions, so feel free to participate actively in the chat box. And now allow me to introduce Dr. Myra Austin, CEO and founder of Management Q's. She'll walk us through the management insights for today. Dr. Myra, it's all yours.
Excellent. Thank you, Marisa. Thank you for the great introduction. So before we get started, let me run through some compliance here. So this Management Q's webinar series is intended for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as reaching a conclusion in any employment area of law. Applicability of management scenarios and best practices and principles may differ substantially in your environment and individual cases, so just keep that in mind. We will use live scenarios. We will do a little bit of discussion between me and Marisa. We have examples that we can utilize. If you have a specific situation or concern, you can always send us your questions. But if it's something that's happening internally in your environment, we really recommend that you seek the counsel of your HR leader or move forward with legal counsel. Okay. Well, thanks again for joining us. I'm Dr. Myra Austin. I bring to the table over 2 decades of experience, specifically in management and operations. Management is a heartfelt passion of mine. And so over the years, I've learned what it is that really sets managers up to succeed and what sets them up to fail. Marisa, as well, has an extensive background in HR and organizational development, over 2 decades as well. And so you have 2 very experienced and seasoned women at the table here who have, dealt probably with every type of scenario that you can think of that managers come across that either empowers them or sets them up for failure. And so part of what we will be discussing in this webinar is, why is it an art in management? What makes you effective as a manager? And what are some of the insights that they just don't teach us when we're getting started? So that's what we'll cover in this webinar series, and we'll deep dive in each session deeper and deeper. So I hope that you follow us along week over week. All right, let's go ahead and get this show on the road. Okay, so we're going to start with an overview on effective management. I'm going to break it down into digestible nuggets. Keep in mind, these webinar sessions are going to be compact snack size knowledge for you guys to take back and really take deeper dives on your end. We'll go over takeaways, and then we'll give you guys some resources that you can continue to utilize as you become masters in your journey in management. We'll open it up at the end to a Q&A. We'll only pick 3 questions for the sake of time, because we want this to be efficient and we want to respect your time. And then we'll go ahead and follow through with closing remarks. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so effective management is the ability to achieve organizational goals. Effective management is executing across all management functions. This particular one is really important, and that's what we're going to focus on today, is what does that mean? What are the functions of management, and why is it so critical as a manager for you to be aware that there are functions that you're supposed to be executing to be successful? Effective management is being aware of the role that we play as managers in an organizational setting. Now, these 3 bullets may seem very simple at face value, but the reality is that there's depth to these words, and there's depth to having self-awareness as a manager. And self-awareness can't happen if you don't know that there are five functions you're supposed to be fulfilling in any management role in, across any industry. And so that's one of the things that I think when we're training and we're managing and we're leading, we come across, both Marisa and I, an absence of acknowledgement or awareness around this fundamental primary key element in management. And it's knowing that we have five core management functions that we should be aware of, that we should be exercising, and that we should be managing against. And so we're going to focus on sharing what those are. Okay, so these are the five key management functions. So every manager in any level of management needs to be aware that these are the functions they need to execute on. That includes planning, organizing, staffing, coordinating, and controlling. So we're going to take a little bit of a dive into each one of these, but in this moment, think to yourself, was I aware that these five core functions were part of my responsibility and part of what would make me effective in a management capacity? So here's a little bit of history. I, as a person, as a manager, always like understanding the why and what the sources are. And so I like to share a little bit about that with you. These are not Myra's five management functions by any means. They come from a long, long time ago. So the concept of management has been around for thousands of years. I think we're all aware of that. As we've seen the news, we've worked in the workforce, we're all of various ages on this call. In the 19th century, there was a man by the name of Henry Fayol, and he was a French mining engineer. And I think this is really interesting. So he is the one who actually coined and is credited for developing the five management functions. What's really wonderful about him, and if you've never heard of him, please do some research on him. It's fascinating how this came to be. And if we have nothing but managers on this call, it should be of peak interest to you to see where this comes from. Henry actually recognized that the skills that made the engineers and everybody working with him good at their jobs didn't necessarily make them good managers. There was something missing. The people that were fulfilling the functions and were successful managers were abiding and recognizing and self aware of the five primary functions we just went over. Socrates, way before Henry, around 400 BC, stated that management was competency distinctly separate from possessing technical skills and knowledge. So being skilled at something doesn't necessarily mean you're as skilled at being a manager. They're very separate functions, and we all have strengths and weaknesses. If we're in management roles, we have to really come to the conclusion that there's a little bit more to it than a promotion, a title, or a pay raise. So let's get into planning. Okay. So planning, when it comes to management as a primary function of management, involves setting objectives. It involves determining a course of action and being aware of where the organization is headed. So planning itself requires a high degree of self-awareness if the manager is to be effective. Being informed about what resources are available to you, identifying when timing is appropriate for execution. Sounds simple, but let me share a little bit about what I've come across, and then I'll ask Marisa to comment on her experience and share a little bit about that as well. In my experience, when it comes to planning, I'm going to use a very tangible example for my managers out there that you can relate to. What I come across in terms of resources, the primary example that I use is the employee handbook. The employee handbook is both a tool and a resource for managers and should be considered when you're planning, because the employee handbook has compliance, has protocols, has cultural impact. It's all tied in to the purpose of that handbook, not just to check off rules and regulations from an employer. It's much more than that. So with that example, what I see happen day to day is managers aren't aware of what the policies are in the handbook. They don't know if their handbooks have been updated or not. They don't use it routinely as a tool to plan around or to implement or execute. And so that's just one example. So let me hand it over to Marisa to kind of share, when it comes to planning. Marisa, what are some of the shortcomings that you see in terms of lack of awareness?
Yeah, so with planning, a lot of what I see is the difference between being active and reactive. right? So when we're active and we're planning, we're literally setting ourselves and each other up for success. We're thinking ahead, and when something diverges, we can be agile and adjust. And so this is something that we don't necessarily see on a regular basis, but it is really critical in making sure that everything that needs to be done gets done in the timing and with the resources necessary.
Excellent. Yeah, totally agree. Okay, so let's move on to the next function. Okay. Organizing. So, organizing when it comes to management means creating order with the people and resources available to you. That's the type of organization that this function is referring to. It's making tools and resources orderly and available to your teams. It's distributing planned work. It's developing an organizational structure. So within each management role, there are things you have control of and things that you don't. But sometimes things as simple as knowing where the coffee cups are, it becomes a massive issue when you have new guests on site. It's interesting when Marisa and I go to train, and we ask for a cup of coffee, and it's almost like a test, right, to see how well organized the managers or our point of contacts are, and everybody's scrambling to find this cup of coffee. Setting people up for success means being intentional about the order that you're creating for them as a manager. As a manager, you should be aware of what they can use, how they can use it, what the company is providing, and to make that part of your planning. So, the other thing that you'll see is these five functions are complementary to one another, they're not exclusive. And the idea is that mastering all five of these functions really creates effectiveness within the manager. It also creates balanced execution. Okay, let's keep going here. So this is one of my favorites, and I'm sure it's one of Marisa's favorites as well. Staffing. The staffing function of management is very commonly misunderstood in my experience. And when I'm training managers, it's one of the things that throws them for the loop the most. So managers under the staffing function are responsible for recruiting, training, developing, appraising, and promoting. So if you're not actively playing that role as a manager and partnering with your HR, there is efficiency being left on the table without a doubt. There are operational gaps that are being created by it for sure. And as a manager, you're not growing in your professional trajectory because partnership with somebody in this staffing function within your organization really is essential to manage people. Period. So this is your function, Marisa. This is where you are on the opposite end
Yeah.
of managers. What would you say to our managers out there?
So, really important, staffing is by far one of the most important tasks you have as a manager because who you bring onto the team, how you manage the team will determine the workplace environment that you're creating. And as a manager, you drive the culture of the organization day to day. And how you manage to these different aspects of staffing will help to determine how your team reacts and behaves in the workforce.
Amazing. So I would encourage the managers on the call to pay attention to these functions and ask yourself as we move along, which of these functions really speak out to you as an area of opportunity for you? Okay, moving on to coordinating. So, coordinating as a function of management means ensuring departments and team members are in sync. That means the manager is the conduit, right? They're not partnered, it's not adversarial with other departments, it's not you against them. It involves communicating effectively, documenting interactions, and agreed upon next steps. It's an accountability setting that happens through coordination and communication. It's bringing harmony in the execution of tasks and responsibilities. So, through coordination as a function of management, you're bringing things together, you're creating harmony, you're making sure that your interaction with the departments are something that's lending to an objective. It's not personal, it's geared towards an achievement, and that requires self-awareness. It also requires discipline of our personal emotions. We all work with people we do and don't like. That's completely natural in any workplace, in any environment. But having a higher level of consideration, having a higher focus goal to anchor those things on, those are the types of things that create effective coordination from a management perspective. Anything on coordinating, Marisa, that you can think of?
Quick point. When you're coordinating, you're having meetings, you're in a room collaborating. And when you walk out of that room, what's really important is that you're all in step, even if you don't agree with the direction, right? So that's a key point in coordinating, because outside of that, outside of that in step, if you're out of step, people notice, your teams notice, and it can cause friction in your work environment.
Yeah, totally agree. The other thing that I think I should mention, and we mentioned this in our trainings, sometimes we bring managers to the table, but we forget to remind them that they are a management team, meaning every manager within the organization is part of a team. It's not separate departments, and it's not them and their team, right? So having that kind of mentality of we're a team, we're a management team, is something that I think plays into coordination. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about how you currently communicate with other departments, and whether you honestly, in your mind, see yourself as part of a management team. Okay, controlling. So this is one of my probably my second favorite function of management is controlling. The controlling function in management refers to organizational control, not being controlling. So let's go ahead and break that down. So creating organizational control is establishing standards. It's measuring performance. It's auditing process and workflows. It's ensuring controls are in place in day-to-day operations. So as managers, it's really important to identify what are the controls in your environment. And if you're still not quite sure, we'll continue over this webinar series to break all of these concepts down further. Today is just an introduction to these functions and effectiveness. So keep this in mind. But if right now, at this minute, you don't know what controls are, this is a critical part of execution and maintaining day-to-day operations.
Yeah, 2 points on that, Dr. Myra. Controlling is really about the controls that are in place that hold us accountable, right, and keep us compliant. And it's also a direct relationship to staffing and the performance management piece of staffing.
Correct. Yes. And it provides direction. At the end of the day, having controls in place allows your team members to know what they should and should not be doing. So we'll talk about that in other series as well. Let's go ahead and take a moment here. Let's take a poll, and we want to get a feel for where our managers are at on this call. So the question that we're going to do as we launch this poll is going to be, which of the management functions discussed would you consider your best? So let's see how the group does. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. Okay. You should see it on your end.
Mhm.
Okay, and we'll go ahead and share with you guys once we end the poll what it's looking our audience is looking like at this time. Okay, all right. Okay, we're going to go ahead and end the poll now, and we're going to share the results. And it looks like our strongest functions so far are coordinating. Coordinating is one of our strongest, and then controlling and planning. Okay, all right. So that's where our group is at. So we'll go ahead and keep moving through and see what we continue to learn here. All right, so here are some key takeaways from today. Effective managers have to be aware of the 5 primary functions. Effective managers are self-aware. Effective managers own their role and fulfill their core functions. Effective managers help guide and monitor team member experiences. Effective managers keep their eye on the big picture. Effective management doesn't happen without discipline and practice. And it looks like we have some chat. So let me see here. Let me take a look at what we've got going on in the chat. Okay. Okay. And it looks like Marisa was handling the chat. Good job.
Yeah, there's not a lot going on in the chat. So if you have some questions, that would be the place to enter them.
Okay, great. Okay. Yeah. So to summarize this brief introduction into the effectiveness of management, it starts with the awareness that the manager has. It starts with understanding that these 5 functions are part of the execution, part of the role, and part of the responsibility. In the next session, we'll focus in planning a little bit deeper and in detail. And so with that said, Marisa, I'll go ahead and have you take it from here.
Yeah, managers, when you think about the workplace culture of an organization, managers really have a key role, right? The role is to drive the day to day, and in your interactions, that's what creates the work environment mood, right? And it could be a positive mood or a negative mood depending on how you're stepping into your role. So as managers, we stress that being organized, planning, being organized and setting controls in place along with staffing and coordinating really creates a work environment that as Dr. Myra mentioned, where people know what they need to do, how they need to do it, and can be successful because those expectations are very clear for them. So, are there any other questions out there in our virtual environment?
Yeah, we had a question come in through our Q&A, and he said, it looks like the chat is disabled. Is this section a better place to ask questions during the presentation? So we can see it on our end, so we'll make sure to take a look at that. But if you have questions, please enter it in the Q&A section. Thank you for bringing that up, and we can answer any questions there that you might have. Okay.
So I have a question for you, Dr. Myra. When you're
Yeah.
working with the various companies that you work with, what do you see as one of the predominantly missing management function?
Staffing is probably number one. I think that
So, mhm,
managers often feel challenged and don't know exactly how to partner with HR. I think that the presumption I've run into commonly is that they feel that a lot of what's under the staffing function actually belongs to the HR leader or the HR department to fulfill in scope. And so that's not the case. It's the manager is in a different position than the HR leader is in an organization, as you know. And so not understanding how to relate, where to take the lead, where the handoffs should be taking
mhm.
place, how to have the conversations with team members, those types of things. That's a failure in execution of that function. So I think that that's probably the most common. The second most common function that I see be an issue or an area of opportunity would be the controlling function. The controlling function, a lot of the
Okay,
times I see it play out as an authoritative misrepresentation of what that relationship with the team members and execution of that function are. And so defining controls in the environment a lot of the times are missing because of that. And in those scenarios, we have managers who are telling people what to do, but they're not really developing people. And their
got
process and
it.
systems don't have controls that allow for efficient and effective execution.
Okay, great summary of two of the functions that you normally see require improvement. We have a question from Nicole who is saying, of the five, are there any components of management you think are more important to tackle first?
Oh, great question. So I think the very first one, in my opinion, is the staffing function. Because I think if you don't have a well-rounded understanding of what that requirement is, that's what creates the lack of alignment with culture. That's what creates employee claims. That's what creates a lack of understanding of the responsibility the manager has when they're addressing employee concerns or dissatisfaction. They're waiting for the HR leader in those instances to pick that up, and it actually belongs to them. So that there's a
Mm,
disconnect in organizations because of that. So I think that managers that are well trained start with that staffing function and then move through the rest. And if they start in that order, they're usually much more effective in their management roles. Great question. Okay.
okay, so speaking of training, Dr. Myra, I'm sorry, was there another question?
No, I think we're good.
No. Okay, so speaking of training, Dr. Myra, tell us a little bit more about what you can offer, and then we have one more question we can take.
Okay, great. Yeah. So we offer live training, we offer online courses, we provide tools, templates, anything that you can think of that's really something, that's really an opportunity for managers to improve in an area. We have it is my belief as a trainer and as an executive leader that everybody learns in different ways, everybody retains things at a different pace, and so there needs to be more out there available for managers that they can use while being busy professionals, while being working parents, while having gaps in education, whatever the situation is. There we labor these areas to provide an opportunity for everybody to be successful in management. And so in addition to that, we look at assessments as well, right? So we provide opportunities for managers to really understand where they're at, because how else do you gain awareness if you don't know where you fall short or what your opportunity really looks like for growth as a manager.
Okay, with 1 minute left to answer this question, for any individual contributors that are looking to develop into a managerial role, what is the suggested function to develop first and perhaps last? So what would be a priority?
So first I would say staffing, and last I would say planning. And the reason why I would say planning, and it'd be interesting to see what order you would each put those functions in, but planning really requires a high degree of awareness for it to be done right. And a lot of the times we go into planning with short-sightedness as managers because we lack the awareness. So if you have all of the other functions dialed in, planning becomes easier. Not only does it become easier, as a result, your outcome is a lot more successful. And so I think that that would be the way that I would do it. If I were training a manager that was just headed into management, that was just getting started, I would start with staffing first. It would change their whole life and trajectory. And
So
then last,
pretty
planning.
Yeah, that's a pretty consistent response throughout our session. So staffing is something that you would place emphasis on. Thank you so much. With the last minute that we have, I just would like to conclude today's session. I encourage you all to take the insights you've gained and apply them to your professional journey. If you have other questions or would like to revisit today's content, the recording of this webinar will be emailed to all the participants. And you can find additional resources, including management planners, and other tools to support your ongoing development at www.managementcues.org. You can connect with us again next week as we continue this series on the art of effective management on Wednesday, January 31st at 10 a.m. Pacific. Or you can connect with Management Cues on Instagram, Facebook, and or LinkedIn to stay updated on future events and to share your feedback. Thank you all for being part of the Art of Effective Management series, and we will look forward to seeing you very soon. Have a
Bye,
great day,
everybody. Thank
everybody.
you so much for joining. See you next week.